For our research projects, we decided to do something a little bit different, which is a podcast on the topic of environmentalism in the late 20th and into the 21st century. We will be examining the many shifts in momentum of the movement and really try to analyze what may have caused the change of intensity of environmentalism. We'd call the start of the movement, really, in 1962 when Rachel Carson wrote her novel Silent Spring, in which she expressed some grave concerns she had about the environment, especially about the use of DDT as a common household pesticide that was just being sprayed in neighborhoods.
Yeah, and it really encapsulates like great detail in a lot of her observations and what she had seen, especially in the first chapter, where you could see a lot of like really vivid language and a lot of emotion that she shows, and
right.
It really affected a lot of viewers and readers out there. That
They could
changed.
really tell how much she cared, and it really got through to them, especially young people, which we can see in the 70s. Young people were an immense part of the movement that really kind of drove it, as you could say in any movement they do. Young people really are the driving force. They're the ones who get excited and really create that commotion that's necessary to bring attention and to create change in a movement.
Yeah, I mean, it really did create a whole scene that was never really viewed or focused on before in previous time.
Right, and it really took off because only a year after she put out the book, there was the first of over a dozen environmental acts that would pass through the rest of the 60s and the 70s, and the first one was the Clean Air Act, or an amendment to it, that expanded government control over regulating the amount of pollution put out by companies. Like, they're really kind of tightening their fist on that, and then from there the movement just continued to pick up momentum. The next major piece of literature that was published that drew attention to the environmental cause was when Paul Ehrlich came out with his book in 1968 called The Population Bomb, which kind of for the first time really expressed the idea and kind of developed the idea of overpopulation, what that effect is on the environment. And in 1968, just to mention, the population of the world was only 3.5 billion, which is only half of what it is today.
Yeah.
And he still said in the first line of his book, we have failed, right? Humanity has failed as a society, as a race. The Earth isn't capable of sustaining that many people. And he says that we've failed and people will go hungry. That's just where we are.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see too how impressionable these works that these activists are publishing. And a lot more people were reading, and they had time to read during these times. It was before
before the internet.
It was before
right.
the 80s.
It was all articles. It was all authors that were really getting the word out.
And it was before the technology boom of the 80s, and I think that's what really drove a younger generation, younger eyes to really push a better front to really go in make a forward step and make good progress overall.
Right. After the book, the movement grew even more. You can see moving towards the 1970s. In '69, there was the first of many just really
catastrophes.
Yeah,
really.
catastrophes.
Yeah.
That's a perfect way to put it, right? It was in the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. It burst into flames because it was petroleum oil just floating on the surface. It was walls of flames 5 stories high, and that was kind of just a really eye-opening symbol that just
something's not right.
Exactly, something is not right.
Something needs to change, and it really something just needs to happen. I mean, when you're questioning science like that, and you're just seeing something before you, it's something that really kind of makes you take a step back and is like, whoa, what is going on?
Right.
So.
And it really did affect the world because the next year in 1970, it was really a revolutionary year for the environmentalist movement. The first Earth Day was April 22nd. That was organized by Dennis Hayes, who would continue to be an immense part of the environmentalist movement. And the footage and all the reports of the protests that went on really shows how the young people were very, very involved.
Very involved.
Right.
And it was seen everywhere.
Universities. Students wore gas masks to the universities to protest air pollution. In Miami, there was the Angry Orange Parade.
The Angry Orange, wearing the orange,
which is for Agent Orange, right?
Yeah,
In
Agent Orange, the war crime of using that chemical, and
right, and just really saw the young people come out and stand up.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with this movement too, is how really the only progress that is being made and really seen is from the younger generation's eyes throughout history, that are kind of taking it seriously and is really affecting the pace of how it all moves.
Right. So. The momentum that was built up to 1970, it really did show, and it made a difference. There was in just the year 1970 alone, there was countless organizations that was made.
Yep.
The EPA, NOAA, and those organizations obviously still around today.
Yep. Yeah. EPA is definitely a big one. How they were given lots of power to really control and enforce these acts that were put in place in the 70s.
Absolutely. Right, and all the protests, it was really directed towards the government. People were looking to the government directly for change, and that was something that really showed in Dennis Hayes' campaign for the congressional election. He used the Dirty Dozen campaign. Is kind of the name it developed. It was targeting 12 congressmen who were consistently lobbying against environmentalist movements.
And focusing on strictly the economy, which we see throughout history.
Right, so he thought of that as a real stopping block for the movement as a whole. And he kind of
helped push for positive change.
Exactly, and 7 of them were removed, which really shifted Congress in favor of the environmentalist movement, which opened the gate for the rest of the 70s.
That opened the floodgate for, I mean, what we see stepping back as we go over this whole change and how it goes up and down, the highs and the lows of the movement. It really shows, that displays how
there was really a climax.
It was really a climax.
If you were going to track momentum in that sense,
exactly.
I would absolutely call it the climax.
And the change needs to happen on the biggest front that you can have, and that's the higher ups in society.
And the environmentalist movement kept charging forward in the 70s. Countless acts were passed throughout the decade, having to do with the Clean Water Act. It's trying to stop water pollution. They dealt with air pollution, and even in 1972, a really amazing thing, a really great milestone in the environmentalist movement is DDT finally being banned. Which has been argued by, which was brought up initially by Rachel Carson in Silent Spring. It took a whole decade, but DDT was finally banned.
Yeah, and it just kind of shows the effects of her work and her legacy, having it be banned so many years after.
Absolutely, right.
And how that kind of affected such a great audience, and how it was seen by the public side.
Absolutely. So. Right, and right after DDT was banned, they moved on to the next real chemical enemy to the environment, which was CFCs, which were chemicals just found everywhere in household items, the main one being aerosol.
Yeah.
And CFCs, there was lots of data from chemists that was published to the public that really showed how CFC is affecting the ozone layer directly.
Yeah.
And that was the first look at kind of the long-term climate issues that would arise. It really started with the argument behind CFC, which was not taken well. Right, there was lots of backlash.
And that's another thing you see with a lot of these.
You saw it with DDT as well.
A lot of these fronts is. There's almost, that's almost why the movement is kind of goes up and then it goes dramatically down. It stalls, it picks up. It's because of these major pushbacks from higher ups in society.
You could even see it as early as the first Earth Day, 1970. Later on the day, while protests were still going on, politicians went live on air and said, it's great, or I'm paraphrasing here, they said, it's great that you're coming out and supporting the environment, but let's not allow that to cover up, and we can't overlook the greater issues. And the main one they used is the war in Vietnam. It's kind of a classic ploy that you see the government and politicians use all the time, which is just deflect. They're really being pointed at for answers to help the environment, and they didn't want to take that heat directly.
No. And you see that a lot too with pretty much, a lot of these catastrophes we see in the 70s, where there was a climax, but there was a lot of events that really showed that a lot of changes had happened. For example, the Hooker Hooker Company with the
Absolutely.
Love Canal,
Right,
dumping,
yeah.
hiding all of that.
1978, they found out that they
Yeah.
were leaking chemicals in the ground for. It was 1942 to
It was
52.
yeah, it was
right?
40s and the 50s. Is when they were dumping, and I mean all that.
I think we have a number on that. It was over 21,000 tons of toxic chemicals just leaked right into the ground.
And it was seen through the sludge that would affecting neighbors. I'm not neighbors, just houses in and out of neighborhoods that were all built upon so many years later, and it's just it's sad to see these companies that are economy driven over rather cleaning up their act and really kind of showing.
They take the cheap option over the
exactly because they don't want to deal with the legal issues that come along with it.
Right, exactly, or the money it would take to properly deal with their wastes.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is kind of the first time we start to see a trend that carries through up till present, with countless examples that companies and large corporations are really, really responsible for a lot of the mass pollution we see.
Yeah.
Right, and we really see that. Where that differs from now, in the 70s, the companies were not nearly as big as they are today. They didn't have nearly as much power within the country, and the government still had the authority over them to really impose strict regulations, and that's why the movement was so successful.
Yeah.
We could lobby towards the government. We could lobby for the government to make change, which is a very much more approachable direction than going to the companies directly, which you really can't do successfully.
We're definitely losing that sense of control over one another and almost like the checks and balances of how this environmental movement is kind of going to be worked out and really set in place. And especially, I mean, as we move through the 70s and into the 80s and even now in present day, it's really being lost by these big corporations that are kind of just dwindling down, and how they are kind of just hiding all the ins and outs of really what's going on.
Which they're able to do because like the shift that came around in society, the economy, in politics, that came around the year 1980 and the 1980 election. Because before it, we saw it was the post World War II era, where the people, the population, all the citizens were really motivated to come together. They were super willing to give in and for social sacrifice for a greater cause. And that was just a unity you saw after World War II.
Yeah.
Which was really lost in the age that came after the 1980, which is the age of mega corporations.
And
the industrial boom.
Industrial boom. You know, we had the housing boom in the 80s, and there was lots of, and it was just technology, and people just had less time to take a step back and kind of see what was really going on in that. And it's sad because it causes a major decline in taking a great leap forward to kind of bettering off the world, you know, since we only have one of them.
And we really saw that shift with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, and coming after Jimmy Carter, who had a relatively environmentalist focused campaign, at least in a certain sense. He promised to convert at least 20% of America's energy to solar by 2000,
which is a big statement.
Right, exactly. It really reflected the feelings of the 70s and how the movement had
it gets people
great
excited.
Momentum. Exactly. And it completely switched with Reagan. He was completely economically driven, and he some of his first things that he did in office was the 1981 budget cut, which he cut about 90% of the funding for the Federal Solar Energy Research Institution, which was led by Dennis Hayes. It cut 90%, and he cut countless other funding for these environmental organizations made in the 70s, and allocated the money to tax breaks for large corporations to boost the economy that way, towards the military, and this is the same kind of tax breaks the same kind of budget cuts that we see today. It really shows that we are truly still in that age, and that's why you could say the environmentalist movement is still suffering.
And the administration even today is doing the same thing.
Absolutely,
with you know, they're hiding money, they're putting money towards wrong causes, and
so tracking back a little bit to the Love Canal, it really wasn't, and there was it took a while for legislature to really kind of address it and give the people the response that they wanted, at least partially. And that came in 1980 when the Environmental Response and Liability Act was passed, which legally holds companies responsible for paying or dealing with the proper cleaning of waste sites from production, which was a huge deal, I'd say. And it was really the last major corporation restricting act that was passed
in the 80s,
right? In the 80s and even
now
to present, right? Exactly. And we're gonna, as we progress and look at some more disasters that happened environmentally, we're gonna see that it's still the corporations that are responsible. We can move towards 1985, where we still see the press and media kind of shedding light to the environment, even though the movement may not have been as strong. In 1985, Nature magazine published an article that kind of for the first time exposed the hole that was being torn in the ozone layer over the Antarctic, and which was a huge deal because people were saying that, chemists were saying that since the 70s, and it was just being shot down. Exactly. Right. It was kind of accepted in 1985 with Nature magazine.
Yeah, and to go along with the like the small progression that was seen, even though the whole movement overall was kind of at a low. I mean, Bush's 1988 campaign had taken a stroll through the Boston Harbor and had seen how just wrecked and just how polluted the waters in the whole harbor were around Boston. And from that, there was studies seen in the fisheries after that the fish were having deformities that were directly linked to
and just had toxins
and linked to sewage that was just being dumped. And I mean, it took a long time, but over a 30-year cleanup, the harbor was able to completely switch around off of even the main, right where the sites are being dumped. The fish were completely okay, and it kind of just goes to show that ecosystems can be turned around and things can get better. And it was just good to see that there was still
that there's
movement.
Solutions, right?
Yeah, there was solution and there was advancement in a time where.
Right, but the essence of environmentalism, it really supports the finding of solutions for the mass pollution that's going on, but it really focused in the 70s on preventionism, which we kind of didn't really see past the 70s. We saw little glimpses of it, like in 1987, the Montreal Protocol, which kind of finally dealt with CFC a little bit, as more and more studies came out about the ozone layer. In the Montreal Protocol, the United States, Japan, Canada, just for some big countries, and 21 other countries, they all signed on a plan to completely eliminate CFCs from the production of goods by the year 2000, and that was a huge deal, as some really big countries, really big production countries signed on to this protocol. And that's kind of a little glimpse of the preventionism we saw in the 70s, like shining through in the 80s. Right, and you saw another instance of that in 1988 with one of the only environmentalist acts passed by Ronald Reagan, which was the ocean dumping ban. Yeah. But despite the fact it was not effective immediately, it took time. Right, yeah. The goal was 1992 to stop.
I mean, just like everything else with this whole movement, everything takes time, and there's no one solution with overnight change. It's something that it's kind of a slow process that really needs to build up and really get its feet on the ground. Right. And we need a young generation that is really living through it to get behind it and push it forward. And I mean,
that was kind of lost in the 80s because of the economic boom.
It was lost in the 80s,
and people switched from their social sacrifice to just consumerist ideals. Yeah. And everything became so fast-paced, especially with the internet being developed in '83, and
consumerism was just through the roof. Right, exactly. And people
it completely changed society.
Yeah, it did. And that you really saw the shift there, where I mean, the technology boom, people just did not have enough time to really even care. I mean,
Right.
if things would come through, it would go through one ear and go out the other, and it was too fast paced for people to slow down and really see like what was going on.
And a part of that was the companies in America that were really not responsible, but really had a lot to do with the economic boom. They became mega corporations, which we had never seen before in this country, and that's why we call the 80s and up to present the age of mega corporations.
Yeah.
Really, they became just super powerful companies that didn't have the same responsibility to listen to the government, and they couldn't, and the government didn't have as much authority as they did in the 70s to regulate these companies.
Yeah.
And we saw countless environmental disasters that were that may have been tied to the loosened restrictions and lack of responsibility of these companies. In 1989, there was a huge oil spill, which is the first of a couple that we've seen, and it had to do with the called the Exxon Valdez disaster. It was in Alaska, Prince William Sound, Alaska. 11 million gallons of oil were just spilled into the Pacific. It was the first of a couple oil spills that we've seen that you could relate to the loosened restrictions on these mega corporations, as they're just so rich and just so powerful.
Yeah, and just the pushback that these big corporations have, and I mean, it was even seen in more present times, like Flint, Michigan, where the water, where the city,
which again, the huge corporation was at fault for.
Yeah, and the city of Flint was really trying to save money, of course, and they shut down a completely fine and working water valves and pipes, and they switched it on. They used older ones that were corroded and affected waterways, and
were built with lead in them originally. It was really shocking how it was dealt with, because the people would come to literally the town hall with glasses of water from their taps that was just orange. Right, it was orange, and the local politicians responded with, "Yes, the water is safe. I would drink it. You should drink it." Right, which is incredible, as they didn't even
how much pushback
take it to a lab. Exactly, right, yeah.
And there was actually residents throughout Flint, Michigan that really, they went further advocating for the push for a better environment, and kind of really getting behind the whole cause of the movement. And we have people that nowadays that are getting into it, but it's just not being pushed in a bigger scheme and a bigger picture.
And you could almost relate that to the kind of imbalance among the socioeconomic classes that are and how they're affected by environmental problems and pollution. It's been a trend for years that starting even with the Love Canal, it was a lower income community that was next to the Hooker Chemical Company, and they were the ones affected. And you saw it in Flint, Michigan as well. It was a poor neighborhood that was affected, and that wasn't listened to by the politicians when they came asking for help.
Yeah.
And that may have to do with the real lull that we're in the environmental movement.
Yeah, currently.
It's because the middle class and the upper class, the people who more or less have a greater voice in society, are not being affected, right?
That are coming through office, and how that relates to the overall kind of state that society's in, and even especially higher class people.
Right. And the powers that be, the companies, the huge mega corporations, the government, they really don't consider these lower classes as much as they would if it was a middle class disaster, middle class people being affected. And you could relate, and you could say that because you're only seeing, or only the lower class people are really seeing the effects of pollution, it's not as tangible for people, and people are not getting behind it as much.
Yeah, and it's today's day and age, it's good to see smaller nonprofit organizations and people that are kind of showing their support for the change that needs to happen. Right. And you see a lot of art, and a lot of the pieces that I was able to view and look at showed a very progressive, natural build-up of their art and how they're showing. What
time period was this art in?
It's all present day,
is it?
really.
Okay.
And how they're using actually the problems that need to change, like plastic, the use of plastic bottles and such, and how they're creating their pieces that really show what needs to change,
right.
and how the environment and the state that we're in now.
Yeah, and you've always seen artists getting behind the environmental cause from the very start. In the 70s, you saw it became such a trend. Environmentalism became such a trend in pop culture.
Yeah,
you
in
saw
younger generations.
Right, exactly. Especially you could see in music, which was the music industry is driven by young listeners.
Yep.
And that
young,
was really reflected.
People.
There was many songs by amazing and famous bands in the 70s, such as Black Sabbath. They had a song called Hole in the Sky, talking about the hole in the ozone layer. You saw the Beach Boys, Don't Go Near the Water. It was everywhere in pop culture, and that was the excitement that drove the movement, which you could say was lost by the kind of overwhelming amount of content and accessibility to content that we have in this day and age, mostly because of the internet.
Yeah.
Right. We see so many conflicting messages about every topic we read about,
today,
look at. Exactly. Right. In online, there's so much information, especially about the environment, that is with articles conflicting each other. People just don't know what to believe anymore. It's caused like a desensitization towards these problems.
Although there's no one answer, it's just something that the younger generation, that people need to get together to figure out and really make the change happen with many different solutions that are overall going to affect the earth in a positive manner.
Right.
So.
And it's all about action. Today, there's a really interesting poll in 1990, which I'm sure holds true today, if not a greater percentage, that 76% of Americans considered themselves to be environmentalists, which I find impossible, because what environmentalism means to me is that you're like protesting like actively, and you're physically doing things that will make an effect, not just believing in the cause, which I believe in the cause, but I would not call myself an environmentalist, because I've not protested, I've done anything.
It's something that people definitely need to look at in a different way, and kind of
break
really
out of the complacency that we've kind of taken.
And the social norms of what a lot of people are doing today, and how that's going to change, and how that's going to change in the future. So,
right. Before we wrap this up, I want to talk briefly about the effect that Corona had on the environment, which was really kind of a bright spot, I'd say, for the environment.
There was actually dramatic change in such a short period of time.
Right. With Corona, many of these large corporations, or at least branches of them in production, were closed, and it really took down the quantity of pollution that was being emitted, and the Earth really got to heal over the 2 months. There were visible changes to the environment just because of the slow of production and slow of burning of fossil fuels. Like in Beijing, there was
the air quality is
the air quality that for the first time in years there was no smog over the city. Like you could go out without a face mask, and you could see the sun. And
in Italy too.
Right, in Venice. In Venice, the canals were clear for the first time in decades. Which was amazing to see how even span of several months with slowed production allows the earth to heal, kind of thing, which really says we have not gone over that tipping point yet. We can still save the earth. Exactly.
And there's still lots to be done, and unfortunately this pandemic that society is going through now is not a solution in any way, shape, or form, but is something that kind of opens people's eyes as they're sitting at home, and that they have the time to take a step back and kind of get away from their hustling, bustling lifestyle with technology and economy.
Especially outdoors. People are experiencing nature on a scale that I haven't seen ever. Going on hikes at local trails, like these parking lots I've never seen filled before are filled. People are parking on the streets. Like I feel like people are appreciating nature more, which was completely Rachel Carson. Like her whole ideal was just appreciating the raw beauty in everything in nature, and that and out of that respect and admiration for nature, that's where you get your passion for environmentalism and to save the planet. So maybe Corona will help the cause getting people to empathize more.
Only time will tell with
Right.
lots of
Exactly.
these activists and groups that we see today. So
Right, and hopefully we see kind of an upshift
Yeah.
in momentum once again.
all right, thank you for listening. That was just our take on environmental action and how a younger
Right.
generation is kind of really driving the whole movement.
Right.